One of the first things I noticed when I played Alan Wake 2 was how vivid the game feels.
I remember. I was back.
Let's think about why. The obvious answer is the improved graphics, the forest with the variety of plants moving in the wind, the rain causing spaces to reflect light, the motion capture and high-detailed character models. It's a bit of a marvel. And yeah, all that new technology improves how the game feels. I think there are several distinct changes between the first and second game that give it this vivid feeling. Let's look at the camera. The camera in Alan Wake 2 is a close, over-the-shoulder perspective that is common to the survival horror genre. This is different from the original Alan Wake, where the camera is further away. This further away camera in the original game gives a dollhouse effect, where everything feels smaller than it's meant to be. It's harder to see objects in detail and to read text. You can see more around you, but you feel less connected to the spaces you are in. In the second game, the closer camera makes you feel contained by the spaces. When you are lost in a new area, in a forest, or in a dark room, you feel surrounded by the spaces. You see less of what is around your character at one time, but what you see is in greater detail. The objects are closer to the camera, and you can read text in the world and see close-up details. Besides the changes in perspective, Alan Wake 1 also does things with the camera that Alan Wake 2 doesn't. In the first game, while you are moving through the world, the camera control is often pulled away from you, to show you key items or interactions and to direct you where to go. And to do this, it uses these strange, floaty camera movements.
I was too late.
Here they come!
Let's take a break. Just need until licenses.
Obey!
The Park Ranger's instructions.
At all times!
Did you call 911?
Lose!
Shit. Good deposit.
The game taking control of the camera all the time was disorienting and often interrupted the flow of the game. It pulled me out of the spaces I was exploring. It might be fine occasionally, but it's almost constant, sometimes even doing it back to back. Alan Wake 2 never does this. Outside of cutscenes, it's either a close third person, or it switches to first person when interacting with objects. And because of this, you feel like you maintain control. Even in the cutscenes, more often than not, the camera is at character height or close up. And as a result, you feel closer to characters, and it makes the game feel more continuous and cohesive. The 1992 film Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me acts as a prequel to the Twin Peaks TV show, and like Alan Wake 2, it feels more vivid than the original series. The film shows the events leading up to Laura Palmer's murder, and a big part of what makes it compelling is that if you have watched the first 2 seasons of Twin Peaks, you know what's going to happen, and even who's involved and where it happens. But the movie offers you the exact details and reveals some of the unanswered questions. It expresses the feeling of what happened, not just the facts. It shows more of Laura's internal experiences leading up to her death, what her home life was like, and how she was like with her friends.
Do you think that if you were falling in space, that you would slow down after a while or go faster and faster? Faster and faster. For a long time, you wouldn't feel anything. And then you'd burst into fire. Forever.
And it shows the details of her hidden second life and how a dark presence tormented her up to her death. There's a bunch of liberties the film has over the TV show. It can be darker and show more violence, at least by the standards of 90s television. It can also show more nudity and be explicitly sexual. I think maybe it's a bit too explicit for me, considering how many of the involved characters are underage, but you know. And unlike the TV series, the film doesn't have to worry about how it's going to fill its runtime, with the second season of Twin Peaks being more than 20 hours. The movie has the other problem of having limited time to go through the events it needs to, in its 2 hour and 15-minute runtime. Because of that, it feels like every moment counts in the film. Everything is carefully crafted and concise. Where in the TV series, it felt like the surreal and dark Lynch moments were sprinkled into a show about an otherwise charming but mundane town, where you're just kind of hanging out with the characters. The movie cuts out the charming and silly characters and slower moments and focuses more exclusively on Laura and the people directly around her. As well, the locations feel different. It's more on the high school and suburban liminal side of Americana instead of log cabins and pie. And the film feels more like the dark dream quality of Lynch's other films, like Blue Velvet or Mulholland Drive, this hallucination that's heading somewhere bad quick. Even in the slower moments in the film, it always feels like it's building to something. And overall, it's a more vivid and striking experience that's able to create the unique tone Lynch is known for, at the cost of losing some of the charming and comforting feeling that the TV show has. In Lev Manovich's 1998 essay, Navigable Space, he speaks about how, more commonly than not, video game narratives are expressed using a player's progression through spaces. Quote, "Despite all these differences in cosmology, gameplay, and underlying economic model, the two games, Myst and Doom, are similar in one key respect. Both are spatial journeys. The navigation through 3D space is an essential, if not the key component, of the gameplay. Doom and Myst present their user with a space to be traversed, to be mapped out by moving through it. Both begin by dropping the player somewhere in the space. Before reaching the end of the game narrative, the player must visit most of it, uncovering its geometry and topology, learning the logic of its secrets. In Doom and in Myst, and in a great many other computer games, narrative and time itself are equated with the movement through 3D space, the progression through rooms, levels, or words. In contrast to modern literature, theater, and cinema, which are built around psychological tensions between characters, and the movement in psychological space. These computer games return us to the ancient forms of narrative where plot is driven by the spatial movement of the main hero." End quote. Unlike Doom, I think many contemporary games, especially Alan Wake 2, like film and literature, are built around movement through psychological space as much as movement through the game spaces, with both journeys happening in tandem. You see this in Alan Wake 2's main characters Saga and Alan. For Alan, with each space he moves through, he comes closer to escaping the dark place as he gains the elements to write his story with. But the spaces are built from warped versions of his own psyche, with which he has to navigate. For Saga, as she moves through the spaces, she gains an understanding of the town, the people in it, the darkness, and how it works. She works through her first case as lead detective, and has her family threatened by the darkness, and uncovers truths about her family's past, with each of these events tied to the spaces she moves through. And if you think about spaces in games that way, as driving or co-driving element, as being one of the main things the game is offering you, you think about how a game designer doles out their spaces, how they tie them into narrative elements, how they are structured, and how they guide you through them. And the feeling and pacing of these spaces becomes as important as the plot elements or characters you meet. So how does the way Alan Wake 2 structures its spaces help to create this feeling of vividness? In Alan Wake 2, the spaces are structured in interconnected pods, made up of linear sections that lead to small open-world areas. Let's look at the first area in the game, the park alongside Cauldron Lake. You start in the parking lot above the lake. The area is fenced off, and the only way to progress is by talking to Deputy Thornton and going through the hole in the fence. You make your way down the hill. It's daytime and raining slightly. If you follow the main, most obvious paths, you reach Deputy Mulligan and the murder site. You can veer off this path, but you can't go very far before you get blocked off or looped back to the main path. But once you reach the murder site, the area around you opens up. There are a few buildings you can explore, and you find the first of the game's puzzles, notes, and hidden stashes. But how far you can go is still limited by the area being flooded, and it's all within a small distance of the crime scene. It's a relatively small and contained area, easy to find what you need, but still having these little dead ends and detailed moments, like the park signs and abandoned campsites. Once you finish investigating the murder site, Mulligan gives you a key to unlock a second path up to the parking lot, so you can now enter and exit the area from the opposite sides of it. The second time you return, it's night, and it's raining hard, and you have a goal. Saga enters through a hole on a giant tree called the Witch's Ladle. She enters a space called the Overlap and defeats the Taken. After, the sun rises and the flooding subsides. The area opens up fully, almost doubling in size, and the game encourages you to explore. And if you look, you find a lot of the side content, like the object riddles. Overall, the area starts as small and linear, but then expands to a large, interconnected area as you progress. But what makes this structure able to be vivid? Because of its controlled, pod-like shape, it's able to be more densely packed with interactions, while still being manageable and navigable. The player doesn't get too sidetracked from the main focus of the game, which keeps the narrative pace up. But the area is not static, and when there is a pause in narrative elements, the game gives the player some time to breathe, by having the area change and expand in wider circles. It gives you some side content that indirectly reinforces the main narrative, while giving you some breathing room. But as the area expands, it is still quick to traverse because of its shape and the way the paths weave through it or loop back. You're never too far away from any one thing. Alongside that, it has this flow through the pacing of the spaces, short moments of pause while commuting between places. There's enough space between that the world feels like it expands beyond what you see, but it's not large enough that it starts to bore you. With this structure, the game has the control of a linear level, guiding the player to the next main story moment, while still having the sense of place of an open world style game and giving the player some freedom. It's leaving some blank space in a drawing or a painting and letting the drawing breathe. Alongside the spaces that give a greater context of the world, the game shows you close-up details through the objects it presents. When you interact with the non-collectible objects in the world, the game switches to a close first-person view. These objects are like a still life. The objects in the game are well lit and framed close up with interesting camera angles, and they express something about the characters or what's happening in the world. One of my favorites is in the nursing home's office. You see parts of a worker's life. You're introduced to a maintenance guy. You enter his office. You try to go onto his computer to unlock some doors, but there's a passcode. You search the room and try and figure it out. You look closely on the counter and find a photo of his dog. You read part of his diary and find out that he has been trying to get into the cult of the tree. And in the filing cabinet, you find a letter inducting him into the cult. You read about him planning on celebrating his induction by eating herring and drinking. And the next day, when he's hungover, he has to clean up a dead raccoon. There's going to be a puzzle spoiler here, so jump forward by 10 seconds if you don't want to hear it. You figure out that his induction into the cult was so important to him that he made that date into the passcode for his computer. With the computer unlocked, you unlock the doors and check the security cameras. But you also read his emails, and you see that one of his coworkers removed the doorknob to his tool room as a prank. You find the knob and enter the room to find another picture of his dog, stuffed animals he had hunted, parts of a Deer Fest float he's working on, as well as a deer mask. You get a strong sense of this character just through the objects in the space. You don't enter a menu, you don't see the character or hear them, and there's no dialogue or cutscenes. But still, you see a lonely guy who loves his dog, who's pulled into the cult to be part of something. For me, these moments are some of the richest in the game. Alan Wake 2 presents its information in the game world as much as possible. Its menus and interactions are diegetic. Almost everything in the world is presented within the context of a space. Text appears in these pop-ups in the space instead of pulling you away into a menu. The videos you find are shown on screens in the spaces. The save system and inventory are physical objects, a coffee thermos and a shoebox, found in these safe rooms spread throughout the map. This diegetic approach is most obvious in Saga's mental place. Pretty much everything you collect there's not a weapon or tool ends up here, and it's all associated with a physical object. The videos you find are on an old CRT TV. The radio broadcasts you find are on a radio. The weapon upgrades you find are in a collection of gun magazines. Magazines as in the paper ones, not the metal ones. And when you look at any of these things, you see the player character interact, often giving feedback. You continue to embody the character, navigating the different parts of the menu by navigating the different parts of the space. You stay in the body of the characters as much as possible. The audio really supports this in the mind room. There's a quiet hum as you focus. And whenever you are interacting with objects in the broader game world, you hear the audio from the surrounding area. On top of that, when you interact with keypads or safes or locks, and you press their buttons. And when you log into computers, you enter a passcode and use what looks like an early version of Windows to interact, opening different files and programs and reading through emails. It gives the world a more tactile feeling to it, seeing close up and touching things in spaces, and it gives this grounding texture to the game. It gives a weight to the spaces you move through, connecting you to them. You see this focus on objects in the Twin Peaks TV show as well, but in a different way. There are these scenes that revolve around objects, and they are used to express elements of the character and their situation. such as an edgy teenager's cigarette.
Over here.
Or Andy's latex glove reflecting his sticky situation.
Lucy, we need to talk.
But there will also be these close-up, almost still life moments that give texture to the spaces the show takes place in. And these objects give a gut feeling, like a heart pendant buried in the dirt, or a fish in a coffee percolator.
There was a fish in the percolator.
Through these objects, you get a better sense of the small details of the spaces the characters inhabit. And this is where a lot of the show's richness comes from for me. It helps me imagine being there, what it smells like, and what it feels like. The last thing I want to talk about is how the cinematics in Alan Wake 2 help to create its vividness. In short, the cinematics in Alan Wake 2 are great.
Alan Wake. My name comes up, your books come up, you come up. I've read them. There are echoes of my life in there that makes me feel like someone's been watching me. What happened to Alan Wake? The unanswered mystery. Never expected to find you alive.
This is something that Remedy, the studio that made Alan Wake, focuses on, with Max Payne taking the film noir genre and using it as a backdrop. And even the game they made after the original Alan Wake, Quantum Break, being a sort of hybrid TV show video game. When looking at Remedy's games chronologically, you see a progression as the technology and their cinematic sensibilities grow, from Max Payne's in-game cutscenes
Open, goddammit!
to Alan Wake 1's cutscenes,
I knew this place. It was familiar. But wrong somehow.
Welcome to the
to Control, to finally Alan Wake 2's cutscenes.
It's in the rain. Must not drink the water or take a bath ever again. Moonshine. Only drink the moonshine, brother.
Compared to the first game's cutscenes, there are a few things that are clear improvements. With the vastly improved lighting system, it's able to be more subtle with the way it uses a wider variety of color and quality of light. The original Alan Wake mostly had a ton of these panning shots, and the camera felt very ungrounded. Alan Wake 2 has a good mix of shots. It has its pans, but also slow stills, object and character close-ups. The camera work and editing just feels more intentional, and the pacing feels more natural. Where in the first game, some moments are stretched out too long while others happen quickly at the end of cutscenes, as if they were tacked on, the second game knows when to pick up the pace and when to linger. It also just feels very authentic. The cinematic sensibility goes throughout Alan Wake 2. It's It's not just the cutscenes, but how the game world is framed, and how the camera acts when you move through spaces, and how the areas are lit, to how the game's dialogue plays out, and the general pacing of the game. Everything is tighter and more detailed. But it's also how the game handles its transitions in and out of cutscenes. The game world doesn't feel separate from the cutscenes. Cinematic moments are built up to, and tied to the movement through space, and swelling sound. This is most clear when Saga enters the overlaps. Part of what makes Remedy's visual style unique is the mixture of live action and digitally generated imagery. You see this in Max Payne with characters' faces just being photos of people's faces, stretched over a character model, but it blends in pretty well. But in Control, it's much clearer when it's CGI and when it's live action footage. And although the computer-generated cutscenes come close to the quality of live action, it still gives this feeling of having multiple versions. And instead of hiding it or using all one type of footage, they use this in a stylistic way to highlight the strange vividness of this world. This is when Remedy also started overlaying live-action footage into the game's spaces, in these otherworldly, almost ghost-like flashes. Remedy seems interested in figuring out how to meld these two types of footage, and they continue to play with this feeling of multiple levels of realness as an aesthetic and as a theme in Alan Wake 2. Building on this feeling of multiple realities layered on top of each other, switching between live action and computer-generated imagery makes the live action imagery feel surreal. It feels otherworldly and visceral. It breaks from the textures and flattened colors of the normal game world. And the live action footage is generally used for the more surreal or absurd story moments, being most heavily used in Overlaps and The Dark Place, while the game world's footage is used in more grounded moments in the town and with calmer conversations with characters. These two types of footage mirror the two different types of reality Alan moves through. This mirror world, which is a regular theme throughout the game, with the darkness creating alternate versions of people's memories and of the past. The townfolk say they know Saga, and the characters remember a different version of Saga's life. One where she left the FBI after her daughter drowned, and where she moved to the Bright Falls area. And Saga is determined to stop this alternate version of reality from taking hold. Even her partner begins to believe her daughter is drowned, and you might even question what is real. This theme of mirror worlds and overlapping events is where the game feels most vivid. But what are the overlaps? These overlaps are literally overlapping, a space layered on top of another, two spaces that are existing in the same space, a transition, a passage between the normal world and the dark place where Alan is trapped. These in-between spaces act differently than everything else in the game. In terms of space, it's unstable, it's unreliable, it's changing, it's often looping, and you cannot leave it. There's generally only one way to traverse it. It's an oppressive space, compared to the rest of the spaces that are designed to give you a sense of freedom in how you traverse them. In the overlap, you feel trapped, confined with only one way to go. They feel hostile, they're darker, there's no space to pause, no objects to inspect, no puzzles to solve, no people to talk to, it's barren. The overlaps are vivid in the opposite way to the rest of the game. It's less a fascination and more a fight or flight state, a feeling as if just existing here is wearing you down. The overlaps don't occur naturally. They're opened by these creative acts and rituals. To open an overlap, there has to be someone from the inside reaching out, and someone outside reaching in. You see the overlaps from Saga's perspective from the normal world looking into the dark place, and from Alan's perspective from the dark place looking out. For Alan, the dark place is a series of spaces constructed from the parts of his memories that were made by the dark presence to affect Alan. The spaces are made to be hostile to Alan. They mock him and try to manipulate him. But through his writing, Alan is able to change parts of the dark space. As well, the overlaps in the dark space are likely different for different people, as Alan's is made around him and his memories. You see Sheriff Breaker somehow existing in Alan's dark place, and he's as lost as Alan is. It's ambiguous. It's a bit of an unknowable space, like Lynch's dream spaces. You see a similar space in Twin Peaks with the White Lodge or the Black Lodge, the unconscious and the unexplainable. Through his writing, and with Saga helping from the outside, Alan is finally able to escape after 14 years in the dark place. Overall, the combination of these elements help to create this vivid feeling. How the game shows its spaces, how they're structured, and how the spaces give context. How the objects give a close-up tactile and grounded feeling through the diegetic interactions. The framing and lighting of cinematics, how they're used to build the pace, and how they sometimes blend with the world and sometimes stand out. And this all blending with the game's narrative and psychological journey. And this is something I really crave. Sometimes the physical spaces I go into feel barren. They feel far away. I can feel apart from what's happening. The vividness of these digital spaces can feel like magic. It's a big reason for me that characters and spaces can feel like people and places that keep existing even when you're not around, that have whole lives and histories behind them. That's what I'm thinking about with these videos, the magic of something that starts as a vague idea that becomes what feels like a full reality. Thanks for listening, and if you made it to the end of the video, consider subscribing. Bye-bye!
Scratch will try to get you, Anderson. You'll need backup.
I can tell there's no talking you out of coming, Casey. Estevez, is there a way to get that light array to the lake?
Oh, I've got you covered, so good news there. And we'll bring our mobile containment unit. It's specially built for entities like Scratch.
And this work of art, Anderson. What's the plan for that?
I'll make some calls on the way. Just meet me at Cauldron Lake.